At the time, Kouri Richins looked like a woman living every parent's worst nightmare. Her husband, Eric Richins, had died suddenly inside their Utah home, leaving her alone with their 3 young sons. Friends described her as heartbroken. Interviews painted the image of a grieving widow trying to hold her family together after an unimaginable loss. Then, not long after Eric's death, Kouri did something that drew national attention. She published a children's book about grief, a book she said was written to help her children cope with losing their father. To many people, it was emotional, even inspiring. But behind the sympathy and television appearances, investigators had already begun uncovering something deeply disturbing. Toxicology reports, suspicious messages, allegations of fentanyl poisoning. And suddenly, the grieving wife standing in front of cameras became the central suspect in her husband's death. This is the Kouri Richins case. Welcome to True Crime Exposed.
On June 15, 2013, 23-year-old Kouri Darden married Eric Richins in the backyard of their home in Utah. Eric was 8 years older than her, already well known for his successful stone masonry business and hard-working reputation. Friends and family described him as dependable, quiet, and deeply devoted to the people closest to him. By the time they got married, the couple had already welcomed their first son, Carter, who was born in July of 2012. Not long after came Ashton, and then their youngest son, Weston. By 2022, the boys were just 9, 7, and 5 years old, still at the age where weekends revolved around sports practice, family trips, bedtime stories, and time with their parents. Eric focused on expanding his business, while Kouri developed a reputation as an ambitious real estate investor. She flipped homes, managed properties, and projected the image of someone determined to build wealth and status. Social media photos and family moments painted the picture of a modern American family: vacations, holidays, smiling children, and a life that appeared stable from the outside.
But privately, cracks had already started forming beneath the surface. According to investigators and later court filings, financial pressure inside the marriage had been quietly building for years. Some of Kouri's real estate ventures allegedly created major debt, and prosecutors would later claim the couple had growing disagreements over money, trust, and control. And there were signs Eric had become increasingly cautious. Reports later revealed he had taken steps to protect parts of his estate and finances without Kouri knowing, a detail that would eventually become extremely important once investigators began looking deeper into the case. Still, from the outside, none of that was visible. To neighbors and friends, they were simply a married couple raising 3 boys together in Utah, a hardworking husband, an ambitious wife, a normal family life. But behind closed doors, the marriage was becoming far more complicated than anyone realized. And then, on March 3rd, 2022, everything changed.
On the evening of that day, life inside the Richins home in Camas, Utah appeared normal. Earlier that day, Eric Richins had spent time with one of his business partners working on a project connected to his masonry company. According to later testimony, nothing about his behavior suggested that within hours he would be dead. That night, Kouri and Eric were reportedly celebrating after Kouri closed on the purchase of a large mansion she planned to renovate and flip for profit. Prosecutors would later say the home had been bought without Eric's full approval, adding even more strain to a marriage that was already facing financial tension behind the scenes. As the evening continued, the couple stayed home together while their 3 young sons slept upstairs. At some point, Kouri prepared a drink for Eric, a Moscow Mule cocktail, a drink made with vodka, ginger beer, and lime. According to her later statements, Eric drank the cocktail before going to bed in the couple's bedroom. What happened next would become one of the most heavily examined timelines in the entire case.
Kouri later told investigators that she had fallen asleep beside her husband that night, but sometime after midnight, she claimed she woke up and realized something was wrong. Eric was cold to the touch, unresponsive, completely still. A frantic 911 call followed. Emergency responders arrived at the home in the early hours of March 4th, 2022, but by then, 39-year-old Eric Richins was already dead. At first, the scene did not immediately appear suspicious. There were no signs of forced entry, no visible injuries, no obvious struggle inside the house. To many people around the family, it looked like a devastating and unexpected tragedy. A healthy husband and father suddenly dying in the middle of the night. Friends and family were shocked, and in the days that followed, sympathy quickly surrounded Kouri Richins, now seen publicly as a grieving widow left to raise 3 young boys alone. But even in those earliest moments, there were details investigators quietly began documenting. Small inconsistencies, unanswered questions, things that at the time may not have seemed important. And then came the autopsy. Because when toxicology results later returned, investigators realized Eric Richins had not died from natural causes at all.
Weeks after Eric Richins was buried, investigators received the toxicology report from the Utah Medical Examiner's Office. And suddenly, the entire case changed direction. The report revealed that Eric had died with an extremely high amount of fentanyl in his system, later reported to be roughly 5 times the lethal dosage. For investigators, that immediately raised a terrifying question. How does a healthy 39-year-old man with no known history of fentanyl abuse suddenly consume a fatal amount inside his own home? At first, detectives still approached the case carefully. They needed to determine whether the death could have been accidental. But as they looked deeper into Eric's final days, certain details no longer seemed to fit together. According to court documents, Eric's family later told investigators he had become increasingly suspicious of Kouri in the months leading up to his death.
Prosecutors would later claim Eric believed his wife had previously tried to poison him during a Valentine's Day dinner on February 14, 2022, just weeks before he died. After that incident, relatives said Eric reportedly stopped drinking beverages prepared by Kouri and even told friends he feared for his safety. That revelation alone was disturbing, but investigators would soon uncover something even more alarming. As detectives reopened the case and began analyzing phone records, financial activity, and digital communications, prosecutors say they discovered evidence suggesting Kouri had allegedly been trying to obtain powerful narcotics before Eric's death. And according to prosecutors, some of those statements would become central to the murder case against Kouri Richins. As investigators dug deeper into Eric Richins' death throughout 2022, their attention increasingly shifted toward the people Kouri had allegedly been communicating with in the weeks before March 4th. What initially looked like an unexplained overdose was now beginning to resemble something investigators believed may have been carefully planned. According to prosecutors, detectives eventually identified a woman described in court records as a former employee and acquaintance of Kouri Richins. Investigators claimed this woman became a key link in uncovering how fentanyl may have entered the Richins' home. Court documents later alleged that on February 11, 2022, just 3 weeks before Eric's death, Kouri contacted the acquaintance asking for pain medication for an investor client. Prosecutors claimed the acquaintance connected Kouri with another individual who allegedly supplied narcotics. But investigators believe that was only the beginning. According to charging documents, prosecutors later alleged Kouri reached out again on March 2, 2022, less than 48 hours before Eric died. This time, authorities claim she specifically requested something stronger. Detectives say deleted text messages recovered during the investigation included references to the Michael Jackson stuff, language investigators believed was referring to fentanyl, named after the drug that contributed to Michael Jackson's death in 2009.
According to prosecutors, the alleged dealer later told investigators that Kouri appeared nervous and urgently wanted the drugs before the night Eric died. Authorities claim she paid cash for the substances and insisted the transaction remain secret. The defense, however, strongly disputed the prosecution's interpretation of those events and questioned the credibility of witnesses connected to the investigation. But detectives believe the digital evidence was starting to tell its own story. Phone records, deleted messages, financial activity, witness timelines. Piece by piece, investigators began constructing what they believed was a timeline leading directly to the night of March 3, 2022. And then there was Kouri's behavior after Eric's death. According to investigators, some statements she gave appeared to shift over time. Certain details reportedly changed as detectives continued asking questions. Prosecutors would later argue that those inconsistencies were signs of deception, while the defense maintained Kouri was simply a grieving wife under enormous emotional pressure. Still, by early 2023, investigators believed they had enough evidence to move forward. On May 8, 2023, more than a year after Eric Richins died, Kouri Richins was arrested and charged with aggravated murder and multiple drug-related offenses in connection with her husband's death. The case immediately exploded across national media. But what truly shocked the country wasn't just the murder allegations themselves. It was what people discovered Kouri Richins had done after her husband's death.
Just months after Eric Richins died on March 4, 2022, Kouri Richins began presenting herself publicly not only as a grieving widow, but as an author. In early 2023, she released a children's book titled Are You With Me?, a story written from the perspective of a father watching over his children after death. According to Kouri, the book was created to help her 3 sons process the loss of their dad. And at first, many people sympathized with her. During television interviews, Kouri spoke emotionally about grief, parenting, and the pain of suddenly losing a husband. In one interview, she described waking up every day trying to help her children navigate life without their father. To viewers watching from home, she appeared calm, composed, and heartbroken. But on May 8, 2023, everything changed. That was the day Kouri Richins was arrested and charged with murdering Eric. And almost overnight, clips of those interviews spread across the internet with an entirely different meaning attached to them. The children's book immediately became the center of national attention.
For many people, this was the moment the case stopped feeling tragic and started feeling deeply unsettling. Because suddenly, the image of a grieving mother writing bedtime stories about loss collided with allegations that she may have caused that loss herself. And psychologically, that contradiction disturbed people in a way most murder cases do not. News outlets across America quickly focused on the story. Headlines described Kouri as the grieving author accused of poisoning her husband. Social media exploded with reactions, debates, and theories. Some people believed the book made her appear manipulative. Others argued the public was rushing to judgment before trial. But regardless of opinion, one thing was undeniable. The case had now become a national true crime obsession. And behind all the headlines, investigators were continuing to build what they believed was a financial motive. Because according to prosecutors, Eric Richins' death may not have only been about a troubled marriage. They believed money was becoming a major part of the story.
As investigators continued building their case throughout 2023 and 2024, prosecutors increasingly focused on what they believed may have been the motive behind Eric Richins' death. And according to court documents, the deeper detectives looked into the couple's finances, the more complicated the picture became. One of the biggest issues reportedly involved Kouri's aggressive real estate investments. According to investigators, she had become heavily involved in purchasing and flipping luxury properties, deals that often involved massive loans, renovation costs, and financial risk. And then came the mansion purchase that prosecutors say became a major turning point in the marriage. In late 2021, Kouri reportedly purchased a nearly $2 million luxury home in Midway, Utah, intending to renovate and flip it for profit. According to court documents, prosecutors alleged Eric was blindsided by the purchase and furious over the financial exposure tied to the deal. Reports later revealed Kouri allegedly secured financing using power of attorney connected to Eric without him fully understanding the extent of the transaction. That detail would become extremely important, because investigators later claimed the purchase placed enormous strain on the family's finances at a time when debts and obligations were already mounting.
Prosecutors argued the property became more than just an investment project. It became a source of conflict inside the marriage itself. And according to people close to Eric, his trust in Kouri was beginning to collapse. Court filings later revealed that before his death,
Eric had secretly met with an estate planning attorney and changed parts of his will. Prosecutors alleged he removed Kouri from certain financial decisions and attempted to protect his assets for the benefit of his children and family members. Then, investigators uncovered another financial detail that added even more pressure to the situation. According to court records, Kouri was allegedly facing serious money problems connected to taxes and property obligations. Reports described unpaid debts, financial disputes, and the growing burden tied to multiple real estate ventures. And suddenly, earlier moments in the story started looking very different. The nearly $2 million mansion purchase, the secret changes to Eric's estate plans, the alleged Valentine's Day poisoning attempt on February 14, 2022. The Moscow Mule served just weeks later on March 3rd.
Inside the courtroom, prosecutors began laying out what they believed was a deliberate and financially motivated murder plot. According to the state, the evidence painted a clear timeline. They argued that Eric's fatal overdose on March 4, 2022 was not an accident, but the result of intentional poisoning. Then came the emotional testimony. Investigators described the scene inside the Richins' home the night Eric died. Witnesses connected to the alleged drug transactions were brought into the case. Prosecutors also highlighted claims that Eric had secretly changed his will and taken steps to protect his finances shortly before his death. For the prosecution, that detail became central to motive. But Kouri Richins' defense team fought back aggressively. Her attorneys argued the case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and unreliable witnesses, including individuals connected to drugs who, according to the defense, had incentives to cooperate with investigators. They challenged the credibility of digital evidence and pushed back against the prosecution's interpretation of deleted messages and timelines. The defense also argued that the intense national attention surrounding the children's book had poisoned public perception long before a trial could even begin. And outside the courtroom, the reaction only grew more intense.
Every hearing sparked new debates online. Every new document release created fresh theories. Every interview clip spread across social media within hours. Some people believed the evidence against Kouri looked overwhelming. Others argued the public was convicting her emotionally before hearing the full case in court. Meanwhile, prosecutors continued expanding their allegations. In later court filings, they accused Kouri of additional financial crimes, including insurance fraud and mortgage-related fraud connected to some of her property dealings. The defense denied wrongdoing and accused prosecutors of trying to overwhelm the jury by stacking allegations around Kouri's character and finances. And as the legal battle intensified, the case became bigger than just the death of Eric Richins. It became a story about trust, about appearances, about marriage, money, and manipulation. But even after all the headlines, court filings, and national attention, one unsettling question still remained at the center of everything. Who was Kouri Richins really?
In March of 2026, after a highly publicized 2-week trial in Utah, a jury found Kouri Richins guilty on all major charges connected to the death of her husband, Eric Richins. The verdict included aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder tied to an earlier alleged poisoning attempt, insurance fraud charges, and forgery-related offenses. But even after the guilty verdict, the courtroom battle still wasn't over. On April 28, 2026, just weeks before sentencing, Kouri Richins' attorneys asked the court to delay the sentencing hearing. According to the defense, they needed additional time to prepare mitigation evidence that could potentially help Kouri avoid spending the rest of her life in prison without parole. Prosecutors strongly opposed the request, and in a decision that drew major attention, 3rd District Judge Richard Mrazek denied the delay request and ordered the sentencing to proceed as scheduled on May 13, 2026, a date that carried emotional weight because it would have been Eric Richins' 44th birthday. According to court filings, prosecutors argued that further delays would continue harming Eric Richins' family and the couple's 3 sons, who had already endured years of court proceedings and national media attention.
The judge agreed, writing that the children could suffer significant prejudice if sentencing was postponed again. Kouri Richins now faces a sentence ranging from 25 years to life in prison,
with prosecutors continuing to push for the harshest possible punishment. Before we end today's documentary, don't forget, you're watching True Crime Exposed. If you've made it this far into the video, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. It truly helps the channel grow and allows us to continue bringing you detailed true crime documentaries like this one. And I also want to hear your opinion on this case. After everything that's been revealed in court, the toxicology reports, the alleged fentanyl purchases, the financial motive prosecutors described, and the emotional twist involving the children's grief book, what do you personally think? Do you believe Kouri Richins deserves to spend the rest of her life in prison? Or do you think there are still unanswered questions in this case that leave room for doubt? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I'll be reading through them. Thank you.